And welcome back. What we just saw was we just talked a little bit more about Holly Bobo. We received the verdict on Friday, September the 22nd, in which Zachary Adams was found guilty on all charges. On Saturday, which was supposed to be the death penalty phase of the trial, there was actually an agreement made between the state and the defense in which Zachary Adams would serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus 50 years served at 100%. We have with us today our very own Ronn Blitzer, former prosecutor and senior editor at the LawNewz network. Thank you so much for being with us today, Ronn.
Oh, glad to be here.
So, this was such an amazing trial for a lot of reasons. Partly because I think that the prosecution here had a very hard case to try, but ultimately they came out with the verdict that they wanted. We know that this was a circumstantial case. We know that a lot of the testimony that we received was from Jason Autry, who was the prosecution's star witness. We know that Jason has providing his testimony, he may have been provided some leniency on behalf of the prosecution. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you can.
Yeah, it's never easy when your star witness is someone who's also facing charges in this same case, because by putting much of the blame on another person, he stands something to gain, and as you mentioned, he was receiving leniency as part of a deal for his testimony.
Right.
So when you have your star witness as someone who can be, viewed with, degree of doubt for those reasons, you really have to make sure that they come off as credible. And apparently he did. I thought he did. The jury certainly did too. So you had Autry, not claiming to be completely innocent here. He admitted that he went along, that he was asked by Zachary Adams to help get rid of Holly Bobo's body, that he agreed to go along and he helped him do it. He talked about how he planned the best way to actually go about doing that in some pretty graphic testimony. So he didn't try to make himself to be a good guy. So I think that helped his testimony. It helped him come off as believable.
Right.
And really just pointing the finger at Zachary Adams, explaining what the circumstances were, how they were bringing her body out to the secluded area, and she was still alive, and then saying how Zachary Adams then shot her, and then talking about how Adams and the two of the other defendants raped her.
Right.
So it was very tough to watch and listen to,
yes.
But he came off as believable, and ultimately, despite the problems that jurors could have had with someone in his situation, it worked.
Right. And, that's something that we found in the past, even with previous trials that we've covered here on the LawNewz Network, Aaron Hernandez being one of them. We know that a lot of the times when individuals are receiving some kind of a leniency or immunity on behalf of their testimony, we find that sometimes the jurors have some questions as to their credibility, as to whether or not they're just providing testimony so that they could get the best plea agreement in their favor. But we have here in this case, like you said, a lot of people thought that he was credible. Do you think that the fact that the cell phone towers and everyone having the cell phone tower pings with, I believe it was Zachary Adams' cell phone and Jason saying that he was with Zachary Adams at the time, do you think that helped in his testimony?
Yeah, I mean, anything that could support what you're saying is definitely going to bolster your credibility. It's going to, help out whatever you're trying to, tell the jury. So, anything that doesn't directly contradict what you're saying is going to help you.
Right. So let me ask you, what do you think about Jason receiving some leniency even though he had such a big role to play in discarding of her body? Now, we know as former prosecutors, we know that most of the time when individuals are accessories after the fact, they're looking at this as similar sentence as the individual who actually committed the crime. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, Autry, said, his whole time on the stand, he said, did I help Zachary Adams? Yes. Did I kill Holly Bobo? No. Did I rape Holly Bobo? No. So yes, he was involved. He admits that he was involved. But if you're a prosecutor and you're looking to get the person who actually committed the crime, who you believe is guilty of the actual offense, then if you're going to give some leniency to someone who was a part of it but wasn't as culpable, then you're going to do that in order to get the big guy.
Absolutely. So what I would like to go to now is I want to throw to a clip of Jennifer Thompson. Jennifer Thompson, we know, is the defense attorney for Zachary Adams, and she was able to provide everyone with some commentary after the trial. I thought a lot of her comments were pretty interesting, being the fact that there was, even though there wasn't a lot of physical evidence, there was a great deal amount of circumstantial evidence that was pointing to Zachary Adams and the other defendants in this case. So I want to take a listen to her commentary, and then we'll discuss that a little bit more.
Ever linked Zach Adams to Holly Bobo. There, you know, and there's some evidence that didn't come in at trial. They seized all his cars. They went through his house with a fine-tooth comb. They went over everything, and there's absolutely no evidence. The story that Jason Autry told really doesn't make sense. I'm afraid the fact that Zach Adams went around high and was saying a lot of inappropriate stuff before he was arrested, you know, that some of that stuff is just stuff you can't get past, and I'm afraid that the jury took a lot of those comments to heart. And just the other thing I'm concerned about is we put on a lot of evidence about possibly Terry Britt being involved, but we don't have to prove that Terry Britt did it. You know, the whole idea was to raise reasonable doubt. My concern would be that maybe the jury misunderstood, and if we didn't prove that Terry Britt did it beyond a reasonable doubt, that then they are thinking that perhaps that means that Zach did do it. You know, that was one, that they then had to pick one or the other. And that's certainly not what we could ever possibly hope to do, because we don't have the resources to prosecute somebody. So that's my other concern.
Did Zach Adams say anything to you after that?
You know, we discussed it before the jury came out, and based on the questions, I thought it maybe didn't look good, and I told him I thought it was going to be a guilty verdict before the jury came out, and that we needed to plan for a guilty verdict. My expectation was that he was going to sit there and be very stoic, because I reminded him this jury's going to decide tomorrow whether he lives or dies, and that it was really important that he be quiet and respectful. And he took it like a champ. I could tell he was trembling, and he went white, so I could tell he was very upset. I think he's really surprised, but I think he took it like a champ, sitting there, and gave the reaction I had hoped for him.
What's the next step here now?
Well, you know, tomorrow we start with a whole sentencing portion of it, whether or not he's going to be executed, and I have to say I'm very concerned. You know, I know, again, I'm really worried that in a case like this, because of the stark contrast between kind of the two players, Holly Bobo and Zach Adams, I'm concerned that the jury might go for death. And, you know, for me, who sees Zach Adams as being an innocent man who's been convicted, the fact that he could get death penalty is just, it's really frightening to me.
Do you still have concerns about an unbiased jury coming out of Harvard County?
You know, I think that we were not able to go through and really ask the jury the questions we wanted to ask them. Everybody said that they had heard about the case. I think everybody on the jury had heard something about the case, and I just think that it's so close to home, just one county over, they'd heard so much. I'm not sure that you can get an unbiased jury when they've heard, you know, a lot of people had heard about Shane Austin's suicide, and I don't think that should have come in at all, about Shane's suicide, but it did. The state put it in first, and I think just things like that go to bias everything, and so it's a concern.
What do you think the key factor was that made this jury decide what they did?
Gosh, if I'd known, I would have prepared more for it. I really think that a lot of people believe that if you say something, then it must be true. And I think that, you know, when you have people coming in and jailhouse snitches coming in, I tried to argue that, You know, the jailhouse snitches would have been able to hear what he said on the phone. You know, he has got no privacy in there. They can hear everything that goes on, and that they could, all they have to do is do a few comments, you know, repeat a little bit of what they've heard Zach say about the case, a few facts, and then add on the end, and then he confessed to me. So that's a concern of mine.
Do you understand that with 10 different voices from 10 different places, from in-county, from out of state, that had a powerful aggregate effect?
Oh, I understand that, and we knew that going in. The problem is that there's also the $250,000 reward. You know, Jamie Darnell admitted that he was told that they'll decide after people testify as to how they're going to divide up that money. And I think especially if you're talking about a drug crowd and a criminal crowd, that money means something to them.
Did it run down to a situation where the jury believed Jason Autry, in your opinion?
Gosh, I think they would have had to. I don't know how much they believed him, or if what he said combined with some of the words they put in Zach Adams' mouth did the conviction. But I know they didn't convict based on evidence, on physical evidence, because there's no physical evidence. So it had to have been what people said.
What about the schism in the TBI, this bifurcated path? Were you hoping that would make a big difference? Because you spent a lot of time on it.
Well, I was hoping that, you know, I've never before called 5 law enforcement people to testify on my behalf, and I've been doing criminal defense 20 plus years. So, did you have a question?
My question was, what was it? Something, sorry, I lost it.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Talking about the testimony from Jason Autry, I mean, how did you prepare for that in your closing arguments?
The testimony from Jason, well, you know, I tried to just pick it apart. The problem is Jason's story was based on some truth. They were clearly over there by the river that day. And by using some little piece of truth on that, you know, he's able to weave a story. But I just thought, that's not the place you'd go to dispose of a body. You wouldn't go to the river where everybody is fishing. They live out in the country. You just go way out in the country somewhere. I thought his whole story, you know, it didn't quite fit with his phone. My suspicion is that the jury at some point decided that that maybe the 2 other people that weren't on trial, that Dylan or Shane Austin had something to do with it, because I think the evidence also kind of clearly showed that Zach's phone was not with Holly's phone. And if you're going to believe Jason's story, Zach had his phone. So they had to have somehow, and you know, there was even less evidence about Shane Austin and Dylan Adams, but they had to have just made that leap.
Talking about some of the missteps by the TBI that were brought up in this case, do you think that would maybe help you, help Zach Adams in this case?
Did I think it was going to help them? Well, you know, I don't think that just because the TBI made some missteps in this case was enough for the jury to decide that Zach Adams is not guilty. I don't think that. I do think, you know, Brent Booth got up and testified that there wasn't any pressure to solve this case, and Mark Gwynn is here today. I think there was pressure to solve this case on the TBI, and I think they had to find somebody to charge.
You know, you did object when Brent Booth was on the stand at the end saying that, you know, he had the right man. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he didn't have the right man. He did not have the right man. I mean, we still maintain that Zach Adams is innocent.
How does someone on the TBI state that, though? I mean, would that
well,
change the jury's...
You know, the thing that really frustrated me about that is the state had filed a motion in limine to keep Terry Dykes from saying on the stand that he thought Zach Adams was innocent, and yet they worked in through Brent Booth to say that Zach Adams was guilty. That frustrated me, that the prosecution had done that.
Why was there never a push? You never really mentioned an alternative theory as to where Zach was when this happened, or an alibi. I mean, we heard the working theory was it wasn't him, but
right. You know, but that's the thing. That's the thing, and that's, you know, when you go back and look at some of these cases that are overturned years later after wrongful convictions, it's so hard to come up with an alibi when you didn't know you needed one on that day. You know, the person that had the crystal clear alibi, even though it turned out to be a lie, was Terry Britt. Zach didn't know he needed an alibi, and he didn't have a good alibi for that day. And that's part of the problem, is that if you didn't know you needed to be with someone and you didn't know you needed to be recording it and making a record of it, you don't.
There was a lot of kind of during you laying out your proof in your case, kind of all over the place. Is that kind of to mimic your thoughts on how the investigation was, kind of all over the place?
Well, the investigation, I mean, it was really thorough, but I think that there were still so many questions that were unanswered. You know, even if you look at the way the state did their case and the state did their proof, their questions have not been answered. I mean, who took Holly? Who was there that morning? Who took Holly? What car did they drive? Because Shane Austin didn't have a car. If you believe Jason Autry's story, when he leaves the house, there's not an extra car there for them to take. So did they really go by the corn crib and rape Holly for just a few minutes? If you look at the phone experts, her phone passed by there very quickly. Her phone passed by that area within about 10 minutes. So that would have been a very short time for 3 people to have raped her. I think it just cannot be accurate the way that the state's theory could not have been correct.
Are you already thinking about an appeal, and what will that look like?
Well, of course we're thinking about an appeal, and I think that'll be long and slow. You know, appeal processes are never quick. I think that there's some mistakes about evidence that came in. Some of the evidence that came in I don't think should have. The state was able to get in some hearsay, which they claimed was not for the truth, but the whole thing about the rape taking place in the corn crib was hearsay, and it shouldn't have come in. You know, things that Dylan Adams said or Shane Austin said should not have come in. I think the state waved around that little piece of paper like it was some kind of confession from Shane Austin, and it wasn't. It was not about Shane Austin, and they also put in that Shane had an immunity agreement, which I think shouldn't have come in.
Is there ever discussion of having Zach Adams take the stand and give his account of what happened?
You know, Zach, there was, and Zach very much wanted to tell his story, but the problem is he had a lot of felonies in his background, and that's, you know, he was a meth head and a meth dealer, and he had a lot of ugly stuff that comes in had he taken the stand. So, you know, we were trying to keep out a lot of that, even though we acknowledged to some degree that he had a bad past.
Why not still have him go up? I mean, even given his past, just give his accounts and
Right.
show the jury his side of the story.
Because Jennifer Nichols absolutely tore up 2 law enforcement officers that testify for a living, so I did not want to put Zach on the stand and have her cross-examine them. I just don't think, you know, he doesn't have a high school degree. Not that high school degrees mean everything, but, you know, he's not sophisticated. He's not had any experience with that. He's never had a trial before. All the times in the past, he's always pled guilty. He's never before even seen a jury trial. I just don't think that he would have been able to withstand stringent cross-examination, even if he's innocent.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Sure. It's been a tough day. Okay.
You just heard from Jennifer Thompson, who was the defense attorney for Zachary Adams in this matter. And I say was because we're not sure if she's going to move forward with the appeals process here. I thought her interview here was pretty great after the trial. I want to talk to you a little bit, Ron, about her concern of bias in this trial. We know that that's a major concern for a lot of defense attorneys, especially due to the fact that particularly in this case, it was a small town. So even though the trial was moved to another county, to one county over, I believe it was, we still know that a lot of the members of the jury were familiar with this case. Do you think that that has anything to play with the verdict?
It's certainly possible when you have people who are familiar with the case before the trial. It's tough not to have preconceived notions or opinions beforehand. But attorneys, courts try to weed those people out.
Right.
You can find jurors, even if they have heard of the trial, if they haven't formed strong opinions, those are the ones that you try to go to. So ideally, you'd like to think that the jury in this case did not have any bias from thoughts that they had beforehand. But again, if they were familiar with any of the facts of the case, even if they went in planning on being impartial,
Right.
sometimes it could be tough to forget what you've already heard.
Right, especially due to the fact that this was a young, beautiful female who was, just in the prime of her youth, and she was in nursing school. So, I think that also, I guess, has a part to play due to the fact that we have an individual who, in the way that she was murdered, was just horrendous. So I agree with you that emotions probably came to play here as well. But do you also think that the judge allowing that Shane Austin committed suicide, and being that he was one of the defendants in this case, do you think that may have also played a toll on how the jury provided their verdict?
It could have, but I don't think that would rise to a level of being any kind of error or any impropriety in this case. The jury heard the testimony. They based their verdict on the testimony, and Zachary Adams' attorney, said, during her comments there that there were certain questions that the prosecution didn't necessarily answer.
Right.
But I think, what you said about emotions, that could have had something to do with it, whether they were preconceived notions or preformed opinions or not.
Mm-hmm.
You have a young, beautiful girl who was killed in horrible fashion,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a picture painted of a group of unsavory characters who, were accused of committing these acts. And you have, strong testimony from one of those people who was involved,
Right.
saying, this is what happened, this is what Adams said, this is what Adams told me, this is how it all went down. Even if every question isn't necessarily answered 100%, if you have a jury who wants to see justice be done here, and there is evidence to support a case against Adams,
Right.
then emotions may push them over to that side, even if some questions are left unanswered.
Okay, now in regards to admitting evidence, we know that the gun that was allegedly used in this case to murder poor Holly Bobo was found, I believe, this year in 2017. Do you think that it was proper for the judge, it's done already, but do you think that it was proper for the judge in this case to admit this gun, knowing that there was no DNA evidence found on it? It was found how many years later? Do you think that it was proper on behalf of this judge, and how do you think that it will fare on appeal?
That remains to be seen. I'm sure, if there is an appeal, this is going to be brought up. But if you have evidence that's questionable, the other side, the defense, can try to impeach it. They can, ask questions about, what was the chain of custody? What was the DNA, if any? And they could, raise all these issues in front of the jury. Mm-hmm. So it's not like there's no opportunity to bring these issues up.
Right. Now, Jennifer did mention that the state had filed a motion in limine, and what we know about a motion in limine is it prevents certain individuals from testifying as to particular things in a trial. So they filed a motion in limine to prevent Terry Dykes from stating that he actually believed that Zachary Adams was innocent. However, they were able to get in testimony from Brent Booth that he believed that Zachary Adams was guilty. So do you think that that was a clever, I guess, tactic by the prosecution? What do you think about that?
So that is something that the defense should definitely raise on appeal.
Right.
If you can get one witness saying how he thought Adams was guilty and another one who was investigating the case not being able to say that he thought he was innocent, that might be something that they could work on appeal.
Okay. One more question about Holly Bobo before we move on. Zachary Adams testifying. Do you think that he should have, with all that he had on the line, do you think that he should have testified?
No.
No. Why
no,
not?
I don't. For some of the same reasons that Jason Autry posed potential problems.
Right.
It worked out for the prosecution that the jury found Autry convincing, but they could have very well gone the other way on him.
Mm-hmm.
If there were weaknesses in his testimony. Adams, I think, regardless of what he would have said,
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't have come off too well
Right.
in front of the jury.
Agreed.
And I think it was better for the defense not to have him on the stand and to just try to impeach the prosecution's witnesses and poke holes in their theory and try to raise other potential theories than to risk putting Adams on the stand and getting destroyed out there.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on that point, but it's something that I have to ask anyway.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to move forward with the Morris brothers case. For those of you just joining us, the Morris brothers case is a case in which Celtics forward, I believe his name is Marcus Morris, is charged with aggravated assault. There are 2 charges of aggravated assault. There are 3 defendants actually that are on trial here. It's Marcus Morris, who is the Celtics forward, his twin brother Markeith Morris, and Gerald Bowman. So what we know about this trial is that the victim, by the name of Eric Hood, was in a parking lot leaving a basketball game, and he was approached by particular individuals, and during a discussion with this particular individual, he was subsequently punched. And later on, allegedly, Marcus, Markeith, and Gerald all participated in beating him up. So are you familiar with this trial at all,
Yes,
Ron?
I am.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit about it from what you know.
Yeah, so you have 2 twin brothers, both NBA stars. Yeah, I think Marcus is on the Celtics, Markeith is on the Wizards, although he's out with injury right now. Should miss the beginning of the season.
Wasn't that crazy?
Yeah, all this while the trial's going
Right.
on. He's out with a hernia injury for 6 to 8 weeks.
Right.
So not a good time for him.
No.
But you have the 2 of them, and there were, I think, 3 other defendants. 2 of them, I think, already took pleas. So now it's them and the one other man you mentioned who are facing these charges. And I believe that Eric Hood was originally hit from behind and then allegedly attacked by this group of people here.
Right.
And from opening statements, the prosecution was trying to paint Eric Hood as someone who's just trying to cash in on knowing these players, saying that Marcus and Markeith had nothing to do with the assault, but they all know each other, so Hood was trying to lump them in order to try and cash in at some point down the line. And talked about how Hood, who is I believe in his 30s, was making a habit of befriending these young kids who were, basketball players with the hopes that they would make it big and he could cash in on their success. So trying to just show that Hood is a type of guy who's just trying to take advantage of other people's wealth and fame. Whether or not that is a successful approach remains to be seen. We'll see how the trial's going. But we've been hearing from eyewitnesses in the case. Hood himself testified, I think, for a number of days. And then last week, towards the end of the week, a friend of Hood's, Sharika Sharad, I believe her name is, was testifying, saying how she saw one of the Morris brothers, I don't think she knew which one, was involved in the beating. So we'll see how the jury takes that testimony, and we'll see what comes up later today.
I think in regards to her testimony, I know that it may have been alleged through or elicited through her testimony that she may also be trying to cash in on this as well. Did you hear anything about that?
There was something to that, and that certainly helps the defense in this case. If you have a
witness?
Yeah, if you have a witness who is, I'm sorry,
It's
if
okay.
you have a defendant who, or not a defendant, if you have a victim who is, being accused of trying to cash in, and you have, a significant witness who claims to have been an eyewitness, who's also accused of having similar aspirations and potential schemes, then that could help the defense.
Yeah, I thought that it was a great theory by the defense to come up with this. We know that allegedly the reason why this whole scuffle occurred was because allegedly, I believe Hood was sending some inappropriate text messages to the Morris brothers' mother. Am I correct?
Right.
Right. So we know that they could face up to 4 years in prison if found guilty. And this is significant for a number of reasons, them being found guilty, but particularly because if they are found guilty of these felonies, or even one of the felonies, under the collective bargaining agreement for the NBA, it mandates that any player that's convicted of a felony be suspended for a minimum of 10 games. So that's not too fun for them.
No, that's gonna be bad. As we said, Markieff is already going to be missing games for injury now.
Right.
If they're convicted, or even if they're not convicted and the league feels that discipline is warranted here, they could end up getting suspended for a significant part of the season.
Right.
10 games in the NBA season isn't like it is in the NFL, because it's an 82-game season,
Right.
but it's still a big chunk of time, and that's the minimum. So for all we know, they could end up getting suspended for an entire season or half a season. So that would be pretty bad for them too.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw to a clip of Eric Hood, which is the victim in this case, and his testimony from last week.